Hello, everyone. Apologies for the delay, and thank you very much for joining us in our fourth session now of the Girls Human Rights Hub Scholars Program. Today, we're discussing creating safe spaces, protecting girls in public and online with Professor Philippa Webb, Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford and the Blavatnik School of Government. Professor Philippa, in October 2025, she's launching the Oxford Institute of Technology and Justice in partnership with the Clooney Foundation for Justice. She's also a barrister at 20 Essex and has appeared before the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal for the Law on the Sea, the European Court of Human Rights, and the UK Supreme Court. Professor Philippa has held positions in the presidency of the International Court of Nations with H quarters, the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC, and in United Nations H quarters. In her human rights practice, she has represented an individual who has been allegedly subjected to modern slavery and persons who claim to have been harassed for states' use of spy windows. Professor Philippa has represented small island states in international climate litigation, and she's counsel of the states intervening in cases concerning genocide. Her publications include a myriad of topics, including freedom of speech, international law, the right to a fair trial, international law, and also the law of state immunity. So we would say that not just honored, but we are really excited for this opportunity we're giving to the Girls Human Rights Hub community to have this lecture as part of the Girls Human Rights Hub Scholars Program convened by Professor Philippa Webb. Professor Philippa, thank you so much for coming here and for joining us virtually today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. I've always enjoyed my opportunities to interact with the Girls Human Rights Festival and Program. I'm going to speak for about maybe 40 minutes, presenting the overview of the right to the free speech, and then specifically focusing on safe spaces for women and girls. And I'm going to, at the end, suggest some questions we can discuss, but please think of any questions that you have along the way. They don't have to be the questions that I've suggested. They could be questions that you've thought of from other presentations that you've heard during this fantastic program, or questions that you've come across in your own experience or practice. So I look forward to that discussion once we've gone through the first part of this presentation. So I am going to be talking about creating safe spaces in public and online, and specifically focusing on women and girls. So in terms of what I will cover, I'm going to first set out, so we're all starting from the same place, the right to free speech. What is that right? Is it an absolute right? Is it a qualified right? What does it entail? Then we're going to look at, what does the right to free speech protect? What different types of expression does it cover? Third, we'll look at the limits to free speech. When does it come into tension with other rights, and where do we draw the line? And then finally, through a series of case studies, I'm going to look at the problem of hate speech directed at women and girls, and some creative solutions that various jurisdictions have been experimenting with, often driven by women and girls themselves. So what is the right to free speech? And I'm sure you've all heard of it, and some of you may already know about Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So free speech means you have the right to express just not your speech, whatever you say into the world, but what's protected are your thoughts, even if you haven't said them out loud, your opinions and your beliefs. And this is a right that's protected by the government. So how do we exercise our right to free speech? In many ways, saying what you think about political issues, about social issues, about issues that we call issues in the public interest. When you post your views on social media, even if you're reposting something that you agree with or that you find interesting from someone else, That's you exercising your right to free speech. Writing blogs, making music, creating art are also protected by the right to free speech. And of course, peaceful protest and speaking up peacefully are also protected. Now, I've been speaking in general terms, but our focus today is really going to be looking at online spaces, and the right to free speech applies when you're expressing yourself online as well. And that's been determined by the UN Human Rights Committee, which is a treaty body that monitors the implementation of the main treaty in this area, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So that Human Rights Committee, which we can say is like a quasi-judicial body because it is made up of experts who are elected by governments, says that these rights that encompass the right to free speech also apply online. So where do we find this right to free speech? I've just referred you to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Article 19. But this is also evident in national constitutions and laws. So let me start with the treaty and then let's see how we've implemented it in our English law. So the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is one of the older human rights treaties. It's from 1966, and 170 or more, I think it's 173 states are party to it. And it says that we as individuals have the right to hold opinions without interference, and that the right to freedom of expression includes the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing, or in print, or in the form of art or other media of your choice. So this is, even though this was drafted in the 1960s, it's a very broad definition of what we use to express ourselves. Now, when we look at how this has been implemented in English law, we can see that the right to freedom of expression includes freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. So you can see this is building on what is said in Article 19 of the ICCPR. Now, other treaties also include protection for freedom of speech. The European Convention on Human Rights, that I'm sure you're familiar with, in Article 10, codifies the right to freedom of expression. The African Court of Human and People's Rights enshrines it in Article 9, and the American Convention, which applies in Latin America, enshrines it in Article 13. So this is a very widely recognized and protected right. So what does the right to free speech protect once we move away from that very broad treaty wording? First of all, it protects your right to speak your mind, even if others disagree. You don't just need to say things that people are going to agree with, but also what they may find offensive or insulting. Now, there are limits to that, which we'll come to, but it doesn't mean that it's only speech that other people welcome. Criticizing the government, criticizing leaders, whether they're the leaders of the government, of the army, of the central bank, and so on, is permitted and protected by the right to free speech. Expressing your identity, culture, or religion is also protected by the right to free speech. And then finally, sharing information and ideas. When I quoted to you Article 19 just a moment earlier, I said it's the freedom to seek, impart, and receive information. And that means that you can, under the right to free speech, share information and ideas. So it's not necessarily your opinion that you're expressing, or though you may agree with it or you may find it intriguing, but you are sharing information, ideas you gather from other places. But as I've already hinted at, there are limits on the right to free speech. It's not an absolute right. There are very few absolute rights in international law. We can maybe talk about that during the question and answer session if you'd like to know more about it. Most rights in international law are what we call qualified, which means that where they overlap with another right or another policy objective, that they may be limited in some way. So free speech is not a free pass. There are limits. You cannot use speech to threaten or incite violence against a person or a group of people. You cannot invoke free speech to protect speech that incites hatred, discrimination, or violence against a group of people based on a protected characteristic. So that means their race, gender, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, or other identities. You cannot say that you're exercising free speech to use it to spread false information that damages someone's reputation. That's called defamation, and that is a very important limit on free speech. And finally, you can't spread speech that threatens public order or safety, that may spread rumors about health disinformation or about natural disasters and so on that are intended to incite panic rather than proper behavior from people in a sensible way. So these are the main limits on your very extensive right to freedom of expression. So let's focus on women and girls now. And this is where we start talking about hate speech. Hate speech is any speech, gesture, writing, or online post that attacks or demeans a person or group based on their gender, race, religion, or identity. So obviously when we talk about women and girls, although intersectionally there may be many protected characteristics in a person, when we're speaking specifically about hate speech in women and girls, we're talking about speech that attacks or degrades a person on the basis of their gender. Now, what does that speech look like? Sexist insults, online harassment, which unfortunately, and as I'll come to show you, is very heavily directed towards women and girls, misogynistic jokes or memes, and spreading degrading or false content about women and girls. All of those things, those acts, that conduct, is considered hate speech against a person based on their gender. So, what does the law say about this? In international treaties, it provides that hate speech must be penalized. It doesn't say should or may, it's compulsory. Hate speech must be penalized when it is in certain areas. So, propaganda for war or advocacy of religious hatred, racist speech, and incitement to genocide. Genocide is the specific targeting of a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group with the intent to destroy them. It's a very specific and very, very serious crime, and incitement towards that must be penalized. Other hate speech can be penalized if it reaches a certain level of severity. So in the European Convention, it provides that speech that threatens national security, the rights and reputations of others, and public morals can be limited and penalized. And in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, public order or the rights and reputations of others are also limits on free speech. So in the UK, and I'm going to bring in some more international examples soon, but I wanted to mention the UK to you in this instance. I'm just checking. So thank you for already putting a Q&A, a question in the Q&A. I will come back to that after the presentation. Please keep doing that. back to the UK legislation, it says that there are discretionary restrictions on hate speech. So, speech that seriously offends another's religion or morals, that spreads hate or goes against human rights values may be limited. And in practice, this has been legislated and there has been case law on this. So that was a sort of broad overview of the legal framework. So just to recap before we start applying this, we see that free speech is defined very broadly in treaties. It is protected in the key international treaties, but it is a qualified right. So where it comes into tension with other rights or other important policy objectives like national security, for example, reputations of others, it may be limited. So what's the current picture in terms of hate speech and women and girls? In 2020, a survey of 14,000 young women across 22 states shockingly found that more than half had faced online harassment and that nearly a quarter of those 14,000 young women had feared for their physical safety as a result. And this is an important factor to bear in mind. Even when we're speaking about online speech, that doesn't mean it doesn't have a physically threatening component to it. And certainly the mental health component is extremely important. So that's the global picture, just a snapshot in 2020, but from a very significant sample group. Now, what about the UK? 1 in 5 women say that they have suffered online abuse and harassment. Almost half of those said that it was sexist speech or misogynistic speech, and over a quarter of them received actual threats of sexual or physical assault. So this is 1 in 5 women as the starting point for suffering online abuse and harassment in the UK. And 3/4 of girls aged from 7 to 21 have taken steps to avoid online criticism, and 24%, so 1 in 4, stopped posting their opinions altogether due to fear. So that might be taking steps like not having an open account, only having your friends on that account, blocking people who have posted insulting, critical, hateful speech. But it might even get to the extreme, as it did for 24% of girls aged 7 to 21, to stop posting their opinions altogether. So it will be interesting to hear from you in the Q&A if this sounds accurate to you. Are these numbers sort of what you've noticed from your own experience? Or do you think the numbers may even be higher in some instances? So that's the problem. We've had the legal framework, we've had the problem, specifically focusing on women and girls. How should the law develop? Well, here are some recommendations that have come out of a project I did, which was on the right to free speech, and it led to a book called Freedom of Speech and International Law that I collaborated on with several other international and human rights lawyers. And these are some of the key recommendations that we made. We said that states should only criminalize hate speech if it's intended to incite a offense or act of violence or similar action, or there's a likelihood that such offenses will occur. So you don't have to wait until the offense has actually occurred, until there's been a crime or an act of violence. You can limit the speech before that. When appropriate, we should penalize hate speech that harms individuals on the basis of their protected characteristics, including gender. We should not limit it to just race, ethnicity, and religion, as important as those are. Our third recommendation is that this is no longer just about states. This is also about tech companies. because the reality is that several large tech companies have the greatest influence on the exercise of online speech. And they should recognize international human rights standards as the minimum standard for the protection of women and girls, and not as the highest standard that they should achieve. So these are very broad recommendations, but these are recommendations that through our process of expert consultation and looking at the law and the case law across many different jurisdictions, we came up with these three ideas that we wanted to recommend to states, and they've generally been very well received. So let's now look at some initiatives. I did tell you there's been some really interesting practice in this area, and it includes states in terms of judges and courts, and also what tech companies have been doing. So let's start with what's been happening at the legislative level, and we're going to start with Australia and then move to Mexico. And just as I'm going through these examples, I want you to think about whether these are good ideas, whether there could be unintended consequences, and what, like from your own experience, what tends to work and what might not work as effectively. So starting in Australia, and this is, I live in the UK now, but this is the country that I'm originally from. Just recently, they have passed the Online Safety Amendment Act, which will come into effect in a few months in December of this year. And you may have read about this in the news because it attracted quite a lot of attention. It bans children under 16 from accessing social media. So it restricts social media to 16 and above. And the onus is on social media platforms to ensure that protections are in place. So there's a couple of interesting things happening here. First of all, it's the government coming in and deciding what age women and girls, it's also obviously applies to men and boys, but what age access to social media should be granted. And it says this is not just a issue between the government and young people, it's also an onus on social media platforms. So if they want to exercise in Australia, they want to sell their products in Australia, they want people to subscribe to their services in Australia, then they have to respect this legislation. So Australia has created a new position in government called the E-Safety Commissioner. And Australia's E-Safety Commissioner noted that girls were much more likely than boys to have experienced cyberbullying and non-consensual tracking, monitoring, or harassment. And in Australia, almost half the children surveyed had seen or heard offensive, sexist, or hurtful things about women and girls online. That's 47%. That's a shocking statistic, but it may be one that when we come to the discussion, you say is something that you've seen in your own experience as well. So this is one approach for tackling, particularly focused on children under 16. But it is a world first. So after it comes into effect in December of this year, it will be interesting to see how this will have any effects on the number of children that have been exposed to online harassment, and in particular, women and girls. So now let's move to Mexico, where we have an initiative that was brought about by a very brave young woman called Olympia. So this legislative initiative in Mexico is a series of changes to the law that criminalizes the sharing of images or videos without consent, especially intimate images or videos. And Mexico's Federal Criminal Code and General Act, which is a legislation on women's access to a life free from violence, were amended to punish digital and online violence that violated sexual privacy. So who was behind this? Well, it was a woman called Olympia Coral Mello who broke up with her partner, and he leaked a private video with sexual content online that went viral in Mexico. This had serious emotional effects on Olympia. She became depressed. She also tried to commit suicide. But what she realized is that the criminal law didn't help her in this situation. There was no crime that she could charge her former partner with. So she founded the organization called uh, Movement Against Gender Violence. And she started in the city of Puebla in Mexico, but it quickly moved to Mexico City. And it then became a movement called the Olympia Law to try to amend the law to bring in these criminal prosecutions. And as I've explained to you, she was successful in changing the law in 2021 in order to criminalize the kind of behavior that she had suffered. I'm going to add something on this, and we can also come back to it in our discussion. But Olympia is still working in this field, and she hasn't stopped at just amending the criminal code. She has continued to advocate for more protection for women and girls. And actually, she's been behind the creation of a chatbot using artificial intelligence called the Olympia IA for Intelligence Artificial, that is created to assist victims of violence online. And it provides free, anonymous, and immediate advice to women who have been victims of online abuse. So that's what we've seen happening at the legislative level. Let's now move to cases. So there's various ways to reform the law. You can push for law reform through amending or passing statutes, but you can also bring strategic litigation cases that help advance the law. So this is a case that's anonymized. It's the initials of the person, FGX, against Stuart Gaunt. And this was a case that concerned an ex-partner of a woman who was threatening to distribute images without her consent. So very similar to what Olympia faced in Mexico, but this time in the UK. And this time, instead of a change in the law, it was bringing a case before the court. And the judge awarded damages in the claim, and it was the first case of its type to come before the civil courts in England. And this is only in 2023, just 2 years ago. So the person the ex-partner who was distributing the images or threatening to distribute the images was convicted of certain offences. So that's the criminal part. But on the civil side, the judge also awarded damages of nearly £100,000, made up of both the general damages for the harm, but also special damages that reflect one of the seriousness of the conduct. So that's how we've seen development in the case law of the United Kingdom. Now, we also have some interesting case law in the United States. So this is a very recent case, just from a couple of months ago in April 2025, when New Jersey became the first case in the United States to file a lawsuit against Discord. Discord is a chat tool for gamers and has roughly 200 million users, but it is often abused for the spreading of online hate speech, especially against women and girls. And New Jersey's Attorney General claimed that it was exposing children to violent and abusive content and leading to exploitation, and has filed a suit against them. So that complains that Discord is not taking enough steps to ensure the age of people on its platform, and to monitor the communications that are being done through that platform, including the sharing of images. Now, recently, just this month, two 14-year-old girls have sued another site, Roblox, as well as Discord, for failing to prevent a rape and an attempted rape in California. They say that a man was able to attack them after connecting with them on Roblox and Discord, and that these companies should have been more diligent in their safety protocols to protect them from such contact. The men in those cases were masquerading online as teenage boys. So these cases are not yet concluded, but even just bringing these cases has shown that there's possibilities for accountability that we may not have thought of against these companies that until now have had very little monitoring and safety protocols regarding their users. So what about what big companies can do? And Google, Meta, and Anthropic, just to take some examples, have been taking some measures to um, improve or reduce the amount of hate speech on their platforms. So Google, as you know, with the search engine, has committed a $25 million fund to fund organizations to create pathways for women and girls. They've also encouraged a Women Tech Makers program to empower women in AI. Meta, which runs Facebook and Instagram, has centralized all safety resources for women in a women's safety hub. So I was mentioning earlier that there were certain measures that women were taking to block or reduce harmful content. They've also appointed global women's safety expert advisors, which is a group of 12 leaders to develop new policies, products, and programs. Anthropic, which is a very prominent AI company, doesn't have specific programs that support women and girls in technology or AI yet, but they have passed a constitutional agenda where they say that they will want to build products that embody ethical principles. So we can come back to these things and see if they're doing enough, if they should do more. But now let's look at other applications of technology. And these are some case studies that I know personally, the amazing founders behind them. And this is instead of the big company, Google or Meta or Anthropic, coming up with ideas, it's actually local technologists, creative and brave women and girls who are developing these tools to help combat hate speech and online abuse against based on gender. So I'm going to give you some thoughts on how technology can improve the protection of girls online, examples that are being used in some really exciting ways, and then I'll conclude with some key questions that we may want to discuss, but I also see you've been sharing your questions and I look forward to discussing those shortly. So how can technology help protect women and girls? One way, and this is something I'm actually actively working on, and I was, when in my introduction, it was mentioned that I'm starting a new Oxford Institute of Technology and Justice in October. One of our projects in collaboration with the Clooney Foundation for Justice is building digital tools, digital agents that will help women and girls connect to the closest pro bono lawyer or to access a protection order through a court. And this is using AI-powered digital tools to facilitate those steps. So one example is from Malawi, where 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence. It has the 11th highest rate of child marriage worldwide, and access to legal aid is a significant challenge. For the 22 million people in Malawi, there are only 1,000 lawyers. And obviously not all of those lawyers are working on the protection of women and girls. In South Africa, there's one of the highest levels of violence against women in the world. Protection orders are available, but they're very hard to access because they often require quite complex language. It's in English instead of one of the 11 other local languages. And hiring a lawyer to help you with that form is expensive and often inaccessible. So, what solution can we find to these challenges in Malawi and South Africa? Well, as I said, these are homegrown solutions by amazing local technologists, scholars, and human rights activists. So, Laha is a digital safe space specifically for women and girls, offering a place to find resources on topics from their legal rights to their health. And it has an interactive chatbot as well as forums where they can meet for peer support. And I do encourage you to check out these platforms that I'm mentioning, even though they're specific to the regions. But if you just want to have a look at some of the incredible work that's being done in this space, you can have a look around these websites. So that's Laha. In Mozambique, there is SMS Biz or U Report, which is a digital engagement tool for young people to ask questions and receive information on sensitive topics. And any sort of questions that seem to raise a problem of violence will be handled by counselors and referred to the relevant services. And that's a really important point because even as we integrate technology and AI into our lives, we need to remember that there are some forms of support or intervention where only a human will be suitable. So it's not that we're completely automating our protection in this area. We're expanding access through technology, but ensuring that we also keep humans in the loop, as they say. In South Africa, there's a really fantastic website called the Warrior Project. And I had the privilege of meeting the woman who set it up. And that is aimed at combating domestic and gender-based violence in South Africa through providing a site where there is a legal helpline managed by women lawyers that can also be accessed via WhatsApp. There's a list of resources, whether it's counseling or shelters or health advice. There's educational resources, and there's also support in reporting abuse and applying for protection orders. This project appears as a website, but with one click in case there's a person you don't want to see you on the website. In one click, the site will disappear and another website will come up. So it's women who are thinking of what tools are going to really help us in this space. A different type of tool, but one that has been developed in some of these areas is using location in a more empowering way. So my Safety Pin app uses crowdsourced data to for women to share information on public safety and provide real-time safety information for women and girls. So if there's somewhere that they should avoid, or if they want to report something and see if others have had a similar experience, it will, you could do it through the Safety Pin app, and that will actually start to help women navigate urban environments more securely. Another one is the Now Me Kalo app, which lets users mark places where they experienced abuse or harassment, and it ranks locations by the numbers of reports. So that's another one that uses geospatial information. In India, the My Choices Foundation has a mobile app for reporting suspicious activity, this time not just violence or abuse, but also related to human trafficking. And it's created a vulnerability map to leverage big data to identify and track hotspots in rural India for trafficking, which is a real issue. Another potential solution is AI-powered chatbots. This is where a plug-in to a website can answer questions. And once again, if those questions indicate something more serious, heading towards violence or legal action or health action needing to be taken, it can be referred to a human advisor. But for many questions, there could be the chatbot itself could provide the answer. And this has been developed by a nonprofit called ID Insight, and it was originally based within an app called Mum Connect, which was a totally different platform for helping new mothers with questions about their newborn babies. But the same technology has allowed a chatbot that can be used for legal advice to women and girls. So it's great to see this synergy between different projects. And then my last example is using AI for online content safety. And this is where AI can monitor language much faster than any human brain could, and it can analyze it for hate speech, abusive terms, or threats in vast data sets and help platforms quickly filter harmful posts or moderate discussions or flag content for human review. And that's something that's increasingly being explored and can help make online spaces safer for women. So I'm just going to, oh, yes, and finally, just related to this, it's not just searching language, it's also searching images. For example, if there is intimate or harmful images, especially of girls, and making sure that they are quickly removed and reported and investigated. So I'm just going to conclude with some questions, but as I said, I want to answer your questions first. There's a lot of exciting developments in this area facing a really huge problem. So some of the things we may want to think about are, can these systems really ensure the protection of personal data? What about, it's all very well if it can work on a smartphone, but what about areas that have low digital literacy or poor access to the internet? Can users really trust the advice that's being given, especially if it's quite complex legal issues? Should there be a way to escalate complex or urgent issues to human experts? And I've mentioned some examples that have already thought about that. And then finally, how can we build trust in the community of women and girls to start exploring the potential of digital justice to protect their online safety, to protect their exercise of free speech? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move to the questions. So Ilvana, may I ask you, is it only the Q&A, is it just text-based? No one can ask me by raising their hand?
They can. We can allow them to talk. So whoever wants to raise the question by voice, just to raise your hand, please, and I will allow you. Or just put it on the text and I'll give you the chance to speak.
Yes, that would be lovely to not just be me speaking.
And even for the ones that have made the question, and maybe we can ask them to read the question themselves.
Okay, great. Well, the first one's an anonymous one, which I also respect. So I'll answer that one without asking them to to speak. But then it would be lovely if we could ask people to ask their question if their internet connection and so on permits them to. So the first question I received is that, and I'll just read it out for the benefit of everybody. In the case of the limit to spread information that might affect order, how does that interact with the right to demonstrate or the right to assembly if this leads to some kind of social revolution? What is the limit of change when it comes from this type of civic participation and the concept of public order? It's a very good question. There's quite a lot of international case law on this question, both from the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court, and a little bit from the African Court. So public order doesn't mean that the public authorities get to run things exactly as they want to, and therefore say any protest or sit-in or whatever is not permitted. There has to be, they can put reasonable limits on it, but in general, unless there's really a threat of violence or there's a kind of public health issue, like during the pandemic, they can't ban it altogether. So it may be that the right to assembly or the right to protest, which is part of the right to free speech, can't be exercised right outside a school or can't be exercised right outside a hospital where it's going to disrupt public services. But it can be exercised in a park or along a certain stretch of road. And the authorities may also require that they've given certain amount of notice of it, and that's reasonable as well. So there's various examples in the case law where it's this balancing act that it's reasonable for an authority to require notice, for example, of a large assembly, but it's not reasonable for them to say it can only happen, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. on a Sunday. So there's this test of reasonableness that attaches to it. So thank you for that question.
Juna, would you like to ask the professor the question live? I can turn my audio. Okay. So the other question is, Juna is wondering how can we avoid the clash between free religious speech and hate speech against women? Because sometimes religion is used to spread hateful or harmful speech against women, but if free religion speech is also protected by treaties, international law, how would we avoid such clash?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it honestly is one where one treaty is not going to answer that question. So we have the protection of freedom of religion and we have the protection of free speech in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it's about how can you read those rights compatibly to ensure that women feel safe in terms of expressing themselves while also being able to express their religion and for other people to be able to express their religion. I think we actually get greater guidance from the Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, which is called the CEDAW Convention, which is more detailed about how women expressing their religion and also exercising their religion and other people expressing and exercising their religion interacts with freedom of expression. Different states have drawn the line in different ways. There's some good guidance. I would recommend looking at the website of the Committee on the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, because they've given some concrete guidance and some cases on this that help show where to draw this line. But you're right, it's a very difficult one. I think the essential point, if you have to pick it, is what balance of these rights is allowing women and girls to live in full dignity in the way that they would like to. Thank you for that question. So I see an anonymous attendee, that was probably during when I was speaking about some statistics, saying that it might even be higher because some cases go unreported. That's exactly right. And I've already been, sharing some examples with you where we're saying half of the respondees said this or a quarter of them said that. You're absolutely right. It could even be higher than that. So we have to take it very seriously.
We had hand raised by Maria. Maria, can I give you the floor? And maybe we can make it
Sure.
So I'm gonna give Maria the opportunity. Maria, allowed to talk. Maria, you can just open the mic.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Philippa, for your talk. It's very interesting. And I would like to ask how international mechanisms and conventions can best keep up to date with AI, social media, and hate speech toward women and girls. Like if you think we need to create a new convention or update the ones that are right now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question, Maria. Thank you. So I actually think that we don't need a new convention. Because when you look at, for instance, freedom of speech, but also other human rights, the drafters of these conventions were very forward thinking in that they didn't make exhaustive lists of how speech is expressed potentially in the future or what kind of technology will exist. So they often use quite openness. They say including, which leaves a possibility for development, or they say any other means that are equivalent. So I think the evolution in these rights and in the protection is already there and permitted in the treaty. If there was something that we thought is not sufficiently covered in the treaty, like the specific treaty, whether it's civil and political rights or the elimination of discrimination against women, I think trying to draft a new treaty would be very slow and difficult. And we're already seeing that with our experience with other treaties. And just to give you an example, it's not in the human rights space, but just to give you an example of how slowly states move in this field. In 2004, the UN passed the UN Convention on State Immunity, and that was adopted as a text for states to ratify. So that's 21 years ago now. That took maybe 20 years to negotiate on and off. So after 20 years, they pass it in 2004. And now we're more than 20 years later, and the treaty still hasn't entered into force because not enough states have ratified it. It needs 30 states to ratify it, and only 24 or so have done so over 20 years. So that's just an example of how slow the treaty making process is. So even if we tried to develop a new treaty, we would be drafting it where technology would be changing so rapidly as well. So I think the better strategy, and one that is possible, is to interpret our existing treaties in the light of modern technology and future technology and see how they apply through that. And we do have the possibility to do that because, as I said, these treaties have envisaged evolution within them.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. That's definitely really interesting because I've asked similar questions before, and actually I've received different answers in terms of that we need one. But like I also understand what you mean because um, I was in the negotiations of the pandemic treaty.
Yes.
Yes, I was doing an internship at the UN and I was in the negotiations and they were definitely like really, really long. So yeah, I see what you mean. Thank you for your answer.
I think that's actually so great that you had that experience, Maria, because I think it's important early on to be realistic about when do we want to use a treaty, when do we want to use soft law, when do we want to use strategic litigation, when do we want to use interpretation. So it's great you're already getting those insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Very good intervention. So Mara, I believe the numbers to be even higher, and I think that correlates also with your lecture. It's just really hard to track, especially with things like cancel culture. It creates a hive mind, and individuals believe that they're solely responsible for holding people accountable if they disagree with what they say. I've seen many women be threatened with sexual violence for stating their opinion when their speech is not hateful at all. Stark reality.
Yeah, I think that, Xiomara, thank you for sharing that. And because I didn't cover cancel culture in the examples that I was giving. And I think it's a really important one to mention because it has this chilling effect on people thinking, I want to express my thought or opinion, which is protected by my right to free speech. But if it's going to lead to this, hive mind reaction, maybe I just won't see it. And so you don't even have to get to the point of someone being criticized. Already the potential for criticism, and now with the online social media potential for that criticism to go viral or to multiply, it silences people, and that's also a means that your right to free speech is not being realized because it has that chilling effect. So a good example to raise. Thank you.
Sarah says, is there concern that the recently enforced Online Safety Act could suppress content vital to girls' rights and empowerment under the guise of safety? And this also contributes to the whole thing, regulation versus free speech that is happening on the cyber world as well.
Yeah. So suppressed content vital to girls' rights and empowerment under the guise of safety. So, Sarah, this is a really important point to raise because often we see governments invoking safety or security or public order, as one of the earlier questions asked, where the real effective is actually the suppression of free speech and freedom of expression. I I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the Online Safety Act, but I would say that early information shows that it's not having that effect. It's always important to be vigilant about that, but I think it's not having that effect. And actually, that's because under that act, what's being regulated is so narrow and so clear, like clearly not content that would empower women or girls. So for instance, and this is the 2021 Online Safety Act that I think Sarah's talking about, not the amendment that's coming into force in December on social media. So the 2021 Online Safety Act regulates material that's on sexual abuse of children and acts of terrorism. And that kind of material, the reason it's phrased so narrowly is because suppressing that content is not going to disempower girls' rights. Now, of course, those definitions could be interpreted very broadly, or that there could be overzealous regulation, but then there's the opportunity of raising that concern to the independent e-safety commissioner. So I think I'm not saying this act is perfect, but I think there's some good limitations and checks and balances in that act that make that risk quite minimal.
Perfect. Juna says, in many of the cases you just talked about, the women were victims of revenge porn by men. We can see that initiatives are being taken to protect women, but I'm wondering if there is anything done to educate men. This reminds me of a popular Twitter thread where women shared their experiences of being beaten up for just the reason they broke up with their boyfriends. It looked like they seem to have an issue with being left by women and a tendency to use violence to take their revenge. So would it be more efficient to teach educators awareness toward men rather than women? Because it does appear that any women you talked did anything that they would deserve being threatened the way that they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Juna, a really important point because, it's not just about women empowering and protecting themselves. It's about men stepping up, men and boys being educated and fighting it back against the misogyny that is so prevalent online. There are some really good organizations that are starting to focus on men and boys to teach, educate, and raise awareness, as you say. And there's actually some really interesting initiatives that are coming out of the gaming community. So it's nonprofits that are focusing on how they can influence the gaming community, which is borderless, but the majority male. And where, as I gave the example of the Discord lawsuit, has been a forum where misogyny has been able to develop and thrive. So this is a relatively new initiative to start looking at how can we present more positive role models, especially male role models through the gaming community, getting some of these big gamers with huge followings online and to start speaking about these issues and promoting respect for women, but also working with the gaming companies to see how there can be greater protections, better reporting and monitoring. So it's a relatively new thing. I think it's just in the last couple of years, but I've been in conversations where I've seen more and more awareness of that. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be more of a focus in the movement going forward, and that, incorporating men into the movement is absolutely important. It won't be sustainable otherwise.
That's true. Emma says, do you have any concerns regarding the use of age verification methods and AI in monitoring the age of platform users and shared content, creating a different risk of online harm for girls and women in terms of data exploitation and potential privacy violations?
Yeah. So that, Emma, I see when you asked that question and you anticipated the very first question on my last slide, which is we're having various, there's no sort of absolute core here, right? So I've been talking about free speech, but I said this is not absolute. It's also about public order or public health or morals or reputations of others or national security. There's all these other things that may limit free speech, but at the same time, privacy is also a limit on what we can do to try to promote free speech and promote the participation and enjoyment of women and girls in public spaces and online spaces. So yes, I do think it is a concern, but I think it's a concern that means we have to tread carefully and we have to have the right experts involved and we have to do testing and pilots before we, roll these things out. But I don't think it's a reason not to try to do it, especially, AI is a double-edged sword in that it creates a lot of risks, but also creates a lot of opportunities. And I think with the right kind of training and experimentation and evaluation and assessment, we can have methods that really minimize that risk of data and privacy violations. But it should always be part of the conversation when you're starting to share data online. And I think there's just been some kind of data breach in the United States that's a good example of this, where I think women were reporting men on an app and it required the women to upload their information, and then there was a massive hacking, and all that those women who had thought they were sharing information confidentially have had their identities leaked and are now being targeted. So it's a reason for starting with pilots, starting small, making sure your technology is reliable and protected before going nationwide or global. Oh, is it Xiomara again? Is there a way to hold? And I think Xiomara couldn't join on audio. Is that right, Ilvana? Because we read out her last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was Juna, but Xiomara, if you want, yeah, she has raised her hand. I'll give her the floor to allow. That's perfect.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for the session. It has been really insightful. Yeah, so my question is just the one I popped in the chat. It was if there's a way to hold certain governments accountable. So I'm ethnically from Guinea-Bissau, and right now at the moment, there's a very complicated political situation where people have just been found dead. And they don't even try to hide it. They don't make it seem like a suicide or anything. It's very obvious and apparent now. And it's the president, he admits to it, but nothing is happening on the world stage, if that makes sense. It's sort of just ignored. And he's not even meant to be the president anymore. It was meant to leave according to our constitution in February. So it's essentially a dictatorship. If there's a way for these countries known as the third world countries to overstep their government and try to bring about justice to their own nation, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like citizens here in Europe were able to if something's happening, if our governments ever get to that extent, which seems very impossible, we're able to go to the European Court of Human Rights, for example.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm just first of all to say I'm really sorry to hear that. That's very distressing to it sounds like a horribly distressing event. And it's also, it's a very strange feeling when the person in power or the government in power is not one that you can trust. So you really have my sympathy and, any friends and family that you have in Guinea-Bissau who are dealing with this. So it would not be possible to use the European Court of Human Rights, unfortunately, because that is limited to the jurisdiction of the Council of Europe countries, which is 46 European countries, unless the exception to that is if the victims have European nationality. If they do, then it could be possible for their country of nationality to bring a case against Guinea-Bissau at the European Court. There's various procedural hurdles that have to be overcome, such as exhausting local remedies in Guinea-Bissau. But the European Court is probably quite an unlikely forum for a non-European state to be held accountable. But having said that, there are other possibilities. I've just had a look and I can see that Guinea-Bissau is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which we've just been talking about, which is the main human rights treaty. And that treaty is monitored by the Human Rights Committee. So that's a kind of, as I said, a quasi-judicial body. So it's not a court, but it is a body of experts who are elected and who report publicly on their findings. And I can see that Guinea-Bissau was actually reviewed by the Human Rights Committee in June and July of this year. So a report on them may be coming out. The Guinea-Bissau is also a party to the Convention Against Torture, which also has a treaty body that monitors it. So that's another possibility if there's signs of torture from this. They're also a member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, if any of the victims were children. And it has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women as well. So there's possibilities for these issues to be raised with the treaty bodies that monitor the state's parties' action to this. But in reality, if I have to be very practical about it, it's probably more economic, political, and diplomatic pressure that's going to make a difference. And that requires states that have the potential to influence Guinea-Bissau, whether through trade sanctions or asset freezes, or even diplomatic back to take up that issue. And I'm not sure who those states would be. I don't know if the UK would be one of them, but the first point is actually raising awareness of these violations and the leadership problems in the country. So we've got some treaty options in summary, because they have ratified a number of these treaties that appear to be violated by these events. But these need to be combined with other strategies, which are the sort of non-legal political and economic pressure.
And just a follow-up question, with the things you mentioned with the International Covenant and the Convention Against Torture, how do you raise an issue? Because I'm only an individual, of course. How do you raise an issue to these bodies that are out there to help the people?
So it could be, you'll have to look on the website. They may accept individual communications where you can write to the committee. There may also be can I just ask, Xiomara, the people who were killed, were they from a particular ethnic group, or are they women and girls, or is there a specific protected group they were part of?
No specific group. He really doesn't discriminate on who he targets. This one specifically, he was someone that was part of his own cabinet. So they were both in the corruption together, but I guess he started turning against the president. And yeah, some audio messages actually came out of the president admitting to committing these crimes against other people as well.
Wow.
Sort of leaked. Yeah, so it's a really big mess at the moment.
I'm sorry to hear that. So it could be writing to the committee, and some of those committees have forms you can fill out online and submit. But you know, it's not clear how often they're checked, how much time they have. Their budgets have all been cut by the UN. I think another option is looking at the UN special rapporteurs. So UN special rapporteurs are, experts who look at a specific thematic or country issue, and they can be definitely contacted by individuals and have information raised to them. So I think, so for instance, there's UN special rapporteur from Ireland, who is the rapporteur on trafficking of persons. I know that's not the specific scenario you're talking about, but she actually visited Guinea-Bissau in November last year and did a very critical report on the risks there for trafficking. So they're already on the sort of UN Special Rapporteur radar. I think it would depend on what, the features of the violation, which UN Special Rapporteur would be the most appropriate. So yeah, I think it's a matter of, doing something about it is a matter of like researching where there's potential, either, personally sending information to these treaty bodies, getting in touch with the UN Special Rapporteur. They always have an email address to contact them on, if it comes under their mandate. But also just, raising awareness, maybe writing an article about this, posting it online. If that's, you may want to do it anonymously if there's, any safety risk to yourself. But I think just starting to raise awareness and putting pressure on, particularly governments that have influence to say something about this, are the first steps.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Samara. And I think we have a question from and we have a comment from Zoe, and I think maybe you can read this one, and then we have an anonymous question as well.
Okay, so I'll read Zoe's one.
Yes, because I think it's a compliment to you to the
Oh, okay. I will just read that to myself then. Okay. Well, that is great. Yes, Zoe is talking about how this has helped her want to focus on civil rights and human rights in the field of tech. And, Zoe, I want to tell you personally that I've been so privileged to meet amazing young women, lawyers, law students, technologists, who are just, starting to do something about this and building apps or collaborating, gathering information, sharing tips online. And, it can build quite quickly. So that's great if this has given you some ideas in that space. And please do, I'm very happy to share my slides. I'll send them to the team, because it has the names of some of these amazing NGOs in the area, and that can be a good place to start, even just volunteering, if you have time at some point to work with these incredible people.
And just to build upon this, Professor, I find the people that work on human rights and tech to be so versatile, because they have the human rights knowledge, and then they go in a completely different field, which is AI, technology, I don't know, cyber, and to not have an tech background, but to take it with you because you have had some sort of human rights background and you want to interlink together, the best people. Zoe, I wish you all the best in the career journey you're taking. So we have an question. What you said about cancel culture, the use of social media in particular, is scary in terms of smear PR campaigns against victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. How could you say that we as a society can go ahead and challenge this whether through legal measures or other means. And love this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, social media has escalated the intensity and the reach of this kind of hate speech. So, you're right to describe it has a scary potential and targeting, the victims. So what can we do as a society? Well, I think social media companies are starting to get the message. And there's a bit of sometimes two steps forwards, one step back, because for a while Facebook had a very good oversight body that actually implemented the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in its decisions. It still exists, but as you would have seen after President Trump was elected, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, announced that they would now leave online moderation to the public and no longer to the experts. So that's obviously not as predictable or as fair necessarily or independent as an expert body. So as I said, two steps forwards, one step back. But I think increasingly social media companies are realizing, including through strategic litigation and through just consumer awareness, that they can't just hide behind saying, we're a tech company, we have nothing to do with human rights. They now all realize that their actions have human rights consequences. So most of them do have human rights trained people. They are speaking to each other in this forum called the Global Network Initiative, where they're trying to come up with common standards. So I see some progress and some awareness. I think we can accelerate that by asking for it, by calling out where it goes wrong. And ultimately, we're consumers. We can also move our money and our attention elsewhere, which is always a very powerful thing to do because ultimately that's what they're profiting off. So, there's small and large things that we can do. And I think the awareness is growing. So we just have to see where we want to target that energy. I think there's one from Sophia.
Yes, she's gonna ask the question live.
Great.
Just do the audio click, please. Safi, please, like the audio just on the left side.
Oh, hi.
Perfect.
Sorry, by accident I stayed muted. Hi, it's been like such a joy listening to your lecture, and I think it's such a great opportunity. So thank you for that, first of all.
Sure.
And I think my question is, as someone that's like a 13-year-old, what do you think we could do to like accelerate action and make it so that girls are more protected?
Fantastic question. And you're inspiring at 13 years old to even be attending. And I know all the work you've done behind the scenes as well. So I think you're probably the best person to answer that question. But I'll share some thoughts. So I think there's small and large things we can do. And sometimes it feels really, and I say this from my own practice, sometimes it feels overwhelming to do the large things. And we also have to protect ourselves from getting burnt out or overwhelmed. So sometimes it's okay to start small. And starting small might be just blocking sites, blocking people where you feel like that is a negative, toxic environment, not using social media or following certain accounts where you're going to be exposed to that. So that's a small thing and it's more about self-protection. I think the next step up is speaking up. So whether you're speaking up against you're informing the regulators of content that is harmful or trends in the use of social media, for example, whether it's speaking up to the tech companies that are hosting this content and not necessarily monitoring and regulating it properly or in the way that, gives priority to the protection of women and girls. The next step is to, actually be part of the solution. So there's identifying the problem, there's being part of the solution. And as I said, I'm going to share my slides. And even if you just start following some of these incredible organizations that are doing work around the world in this area, you will already be educating yourself. And you may find yourself in a conversation with someone where you can share some of the work being done by these organizations, and it is something that will help them or will inspire them to do something similar. So actually just even keeping informed is a way to be empowered. And then the next step up, I would say, is by participating, by volunteering, by spreading the word, by speaking about it. If you get the opportunity, to share with your classmates, with your colleagues, and so on. And then the next step up is eventually to be, even more part of the solution in different ways through lobbying for legislative amendments, through different types of regulation, for making recommendations for whatever field you find yourself in, whether, it might be law, it might be technology, it might be community organizing, it might be consulting, it doesn't matter. These issues pop up in all these fields. So looking out for ways where you can be a mentor, where you can make proposals, where you can bring your skills to bear to actually do something concrete in a field, and you have the time and energy to be able to devote to that, that's fantastic. And, as I said, any of these contributions along that sort of range of things is already going to make a difference. And even being here and interested and willing to learn is already making a difference. So I think you're well on your way, and thank you for wanting to do even more.
Thank you so much for answering my question. And I think it's just such a pleasure to also have it answered by you. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. You.
Thank you, Safi. And we have one last comment from Aliha.
Oh, yeah, you want me to read it? Well, Aaliyah, thank you for having the right to a fair trial in your reading list. That book took me 4 years and 1,000 pages with my co-author, so it always makes me feel validated for spending that time on it, that it's being read. So thank you. And then it's also made you want to consider a career in international law and human rights and looking at women and crimes against humanity. So, thank you. So all I can say is thank you. That's left me with further motivation to do more in this field.
And with this, I think we can close this very amazing, insightful, interesting, a lot of knowledge coming. And I think the most important element that you share is to the professor is be and stay knowledgeable. Follow these organizations, follow this the work that these lawyers specialists that are doing in the world of tech. You have no idea, without their expertise, we would be stuck in a very unregulated realm. So like if you think on the physical grounds, you have police officers, you have governmental persons, you have it is more touchable. You can see it, you can see the issue. On the cyber realm, you cannot find it very, very easily, and it can catch you off guard more than you think about. So we are very thankful to the work that goes unnoticed, I would say, because I do think that a lot of people don't know what researchers do and the impact that they have on regulators and the social media tech giants. But also like your expertise in going in depth on how we can do better, and not just inventing the wheel, like doing a whole new regulation, but basically just use things that you have.
Yeah.
An amazing session, and thank you for all your expertise, Professor Philippa. It has been an honor for us to have you. I hope you had a good time as well with us, and thank you for answering the questions for our community.
Thank you so much. And also to that last comment I saw in the Q&A, and another lovely comment. I have been, so inspired by these questions and also by the presence of these amazing participants, spending their time educating themselves, building their awareness. So as I said, I am leaving here with renewed motivation. So thank you for that. And I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you find it a good time, and we see you again next week at the same time for the Scholars Program. Thank you. For everyone, we will share the slides and the video recording in this week. Hope you have a good time. Goodbye.